At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. Because, after all, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Johnny. Let's begin. Staring into the bowl of technically flawless, tragically soulless purple soup, Cadet Ilya Mikhailov knew he had found the greatest failure of the entire galactic military complex. Their synthesizers could assemble the molecules of beets and potato, of cabbage and dill, but the ghost of his grandmother adding obscene amounts of butter and cheese, the essential ingredients, eluded their machines. He tried to savor this particular bowl of quiet desperation when a shadow fell over his table, carrying the scent of territorial musk and unearned confidence.
"Still slurping that blood broth, rookie?"
Ilya kept his eyes on his soup. He knew the voice. Cadet Vethrin, a corvidan whose species evolved from large, aggressive, flightless birds and carried the attitude to prove it. Two sycophants flanked him, mirroring his flared neck feathers, a dominance display Ilya found as menacing as a fluffed-up pigeon.
"It's good for the circulation, Vethrin,"
Ilya said, stirring the soup.
"You should try it. Might get some of that protein gel to your brain."
A low chuckle rumbled from Vethrin's chest. He slammed his tray on the table opposite Ilya. The impact sloshed purple soup onto the sterile white surface.
"Always with the weak jokes. A defense mechanism, I think. Small creatures often develop them, and your size is certainly something to be desired, rookie?"
Ilya finally looked up.
5'7" is a perfectly fine height for a human."
Vethrin loomed 2 heads taller than him, broad-shouldered. His sleek feathers caught the light, their colors sliding from a starless black to a deep, bruised blue. From a few tables away, Zara Rostova, the Academy's only other human combat cadet, caught his eye. She was built like a gymnast, compact and powerful. She gave him a subtle, long-suffering roll of her eyes that said, "This guy again?" That single look conveyed a piece of home in the vast, sterile mess hall of the orbital station Vigilance. Vethrin caught the exchange and sneered. Ilya's resilience grated on him. He leaned forward, his voice a conspiratorial rasp that carried to nearby tables.
"But we all know your height is the least unimpressive thing about you, Ilya,"
he said.
"Humans don't reproduce like the rest of us. Oh, no. No fission, budding, spawning, or brood parasitism for your kind. Instead, you penetrate each other."
He spoke the word as if stepping in something vile. A ripple of uncomfortable snickers went through the corvidan's cronies. The concept of internal fertilization was a source of endless, morbid fascination and disgust for most species at the Academy. They favored external spawning, asexual budding, or methods far more esoteric. To them, the human way was messy, brutish, and almost cannibalistically, violently intimate, a taboo none of them understood. Vethrin sensed a nerve and pressed his advantage. He unclipped a military spec heat and biomass scanner from his utility belt, meant for security purposes. Not that these idiots had much sense of security.
"Let's get the metrics on that famous human predator biology, shall we?"
Mockery dripped from his voice. He aimed the device at Ilya's nether region in a deliberately crude gesture. The corvidan laughed, loud and braying. The ambient chatter of the mess hall guttered out. Cutlery stopped scraping plates. Every head turned. Other cadets, from the serene plant-like Eleri to the rigid insectoid Drevians, turned to watch the public humiliation. Ilya's hand tightened on his spoon, his knuckles white, his jaw locked into a knot of steel. Every instinct screamed for him to launch himself across the table and introduce Vethrin's beak to the concept of blunt force trauma. He quelled the urge. He was more than Ilya Mikhailov cadet. He was human representative, like it or not. A brawl would confirm every prejudice about his brutish species. He took a slow, deliberate breath and prepared a retort sharp enough to draw blood without spilling any. He never delivered it. The scanner in Vethren's hand, aimed low at Ilya, suddenly flashed, a stark, pulsing, blood-red bathed Vethren's shocked face in a crimson glow instead of the calm, diagnostic green of a routine scan. An alarm, high-pitched and piercing, shrieked through the mess hall, a sound designed to cut through the noise of a battlefield. It overrode the low hum of the station's life support, the chatter of 100 aliens, everything. A synthesized voice bellowed, not with the calm tones of a medical diagnostic, but with the full-throated panic of a klaxon reserved for catastrophic failures. It was the sound of a system screaming, "Run." Warning. Class Omega predatory biosignature detected. Origin, Earth. Recommendation, evacuate immediate vicinity. The sound in the mess hall vanished, physically sucked from the room. Every single eye, from every one of the dozen species present, locked on Ilya. Vethren's smug expression collapsed, leaving only undiluted shock. Genuine fear widened his eyes. He lowered the scanner as if it were a venomous snake, his hand trembling slightly. The red light continued its pulse, casting frantic, rhythmic shadows across the silent room. Someone muttered in the back,
"What the hell is in Ilya's pants?"
Ilya's face flushed with deep, cherry-red embarrassment. A whisper, sharp as cracking ice, came from a nearby table. An Aleri cadet, whose people were scholars of xenobiology, stared at Ilya, her leafy appendages trembling.
"Class Omega?"
she breathed, the sound carrying in the dead stillness.
"That classification is for hypersocial carnivores, for pack hunters, for things that overwhelm entire ecosystems. Humans originate there?"
Humanity had spread among the stars, so vast and far that most weren't even born on Earth anymore. Many species were spread among the stars and born on planets different from their origin. A species' origin planet wasn't really an important detail. The important details were where you were born and where you lived. Another voice, this one from a Drevian, was grim and clipped.
"The classification triggers an organism whose social bonding chemistry is so potent it functions as a contagion. It destabilizes mixed species hierarchies by its very presence."
The effect was instantaneous. The aliens nearest Ilya's table began to physically shuffle away. Chairs scraped the deck plating. Trays were abandoned. A visible perimeter of fear and disgust formed around him and Zara. The earlier mockery, born of superiority, had curdled into something primal and dangerous. Their amusement curdled into a primal fear. They were looking at a biohazard, no longer the small, quaintly evolved cadet from moments ago. Ilya sat frozen, spoon in hand, his purple soup growing cold. For the first time since his arrival, he felt utterly alien. And for the first time, he saw a glimmer of real fear in the eyes of aliens who had only ever looked at him with contempt. He couldn't bring himself to tell them how wrong they all were. Commander Orvak's office was a monument to the color gray. Gray desk, gray walls, gray floor. The inky blackness of the viewport, framing the slow, majestic turn of a distant gas giant, was the only relief. Orvak himself, a Drevian, fit the decor. His chitinous exoskeleton was a muted charcoal, and he sat with such perfect stillness behind his desk he resembled a statue. He steepled his long, multi-jointed fingers and fixed Ilya with his large, luminous, unblinking eyes. A holographic screen floated between them, displaying the full diagnostic report from Vethren's scanner. Most of it showed standard biological data, but one section glowed with that same urgent blood red. "The Class Omega Predator classification," Orvak began, his voice a flat, synthesized monotone devoid of emotion, "is for a threat beyond mere aggression. Cadet Mikhailov. A Corvidan in battle rage registers as a Class 4. A starving cinderworm of Helios 3 is a Class 6. Class Omega denotes a specific kind of threat." Orvak internally recalled the classification's origin. It came from a dry, voluminous xenological report filed by the first Drevian observers to study humanity. a source far removed from battlefield analysis. They watched from orbit with a mixture of horror and fascination as human soldiers and civilians interacted. They noted their chaotic, emotionally driven loyalties, their unpredictable group dynamics, their tendency to form intense, exclusionary bonds that defied all logic and established procedure. The Drevian report concluded with chilling certainty that this pack bonding was a dangerous, chaotic variable, a fundamental threat to the predictable, ritualistic order the Drevian collective held as its highest virtue. So they created the warning flag, a quarantine notice for a social contagion. Your species' hormonal response to social stress, Orvac continued, his compound eyes, each lens reflecting a tiny, distorted Ilya, locked on the cadet's face, is flagged as a potential threat to unit cohesion. When under pressure, your endocrine system floods your body with a chemical cocktail. Cortisol and adrenaline are standard fight or flight responses, but you also produce oxytocin, vasopressin, endorphins, chemicals associated in other species with mating or rearing young. In humans, simple social proximity and shared hardship generate them. They create a feedback loop of hyper-cooperation within a designated in-group that can override standing orders, regulations, and even self-preservation. From a tactical perspective, this is a dangerously unpredictable form of biological chaos. Explain this. Ilya felt a flush of anger. You mean loyalty, trust? You have a warning label for friendship? We have a warning label for a biological imperative that makes a soldier's loyalty to his immediate squad mates potentially stronger than his loyalty to the command structure, Orvac corrected, without a hint of inflection. A chemical mechanism for mutiny. You are dismissed. Reread Section 9 of the Coalition Code of Conduct, the one concerning interspecies unit stability. Give me no reason to formally cite you for it. The dismissal was absolute. As Ilya stepped out of the cold, gray office, his mind reeled. A calm voice spoke his name. He turned to see Shrieked, the Illyri cadet from the mess hall. Her skin resembled smooth, pale bark, and her movements were slow and deliberate, like a plant turning toward the sun. She showed none of the fear or revulsion of the others. Her large, dark eyes held only a deep, analytical curiosity. The scanner flagged your potential for cohesion, she said, her voice soft and melodic. It overlooked your capacity for violence. My people seek enlightenment through detachment from emotional tides. We believe clarity is found in solitude. You seem to achieve clarity through entanglement with others. This baffles me. It baffles me too, apparently, Ilya muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. It is a different kind of strength, something the Corvidan fail to grasp, she mused, more to herself than to him. A river is strong because it flows together. A mountain is strong because it stands alone. Which is truly stronger? The conversation was brief, abstract, and deeply weird. But as Ilya walked away, he felt a strange relief. For the first time, another species approached his biology with something other than revulsion or clinical suspicion. Shrieked saw a puzzle, not a monster or a mutineer. The capstone exercise was the grand finale of their academic careers, a full-scale deep-orbit fleet engagement simulation that would determine their final class rankings and future postings. The auxiliary bridge of the Vigilance was a cavernous room, dark save for the glow of 100 holographic displays and tactical consoles. The silence between commands was heavy. Cadets sat stiffly at their posts, their voices sharp and clipped as they exchanged jargon, a dozen different species held together by a thread. Ilya was assigned to Alpha Squad's command console. To his profound lack of surprise, he shared the station with a still surly Vethran and a silent, contemplative Shrieked. Zara was with Bravo Squad across the room, arguing with the Drevian about weapons power distribution. Standard operating procedure. Earthborn, monitor forward sensor arrays, Vethran snapped without looking at him, his claws clicking on the console.
Try to avoid distraction from any shiny objects.
Don't worry, Ilya shot back, his right hand keying in a diagnostic command while his left swiped through sensor readings on the holographic display. My predatory biology keeps me laser focused. Just try to keep your feathers from molting all over the tactical display. It's distracting. Shiriel stood between them, a silent pillar of calm, her attention on the main holotank where a vast, simulated enemy fleet blinked into existence.
They are numerous,
she observed, her voice a gentle murmur.
Like a sudden rash of new stars.
Yeah, and they're about to make it rain, Ilya muttered, flagging a wing of enemy fighters on a flanking vector.
Veteran, they're punching through our portside screen.
I see it,
Veteran snarled, redirecting a virtual cruiser squadron to intercept.
I require no pack animal to tell me where the wolves are.
The simulated battle descended into chaos. Warnings flashed, proximity alerts blared, and the room filled with the tense shouts of cadets coordinating a defense. Alpha Squad was a microcosm of the problem. Veterans' aggressive, unilateral commands often conflicted with Shiriel's cautious, long-term strategies, leaving Ilya stuck in the middle to translate and compromise. They were losing. Their virtual ships were picked apart one by one because they refused to trust each other. Midway through the simulation, just as a virtual capital ship on the main screen erupted in a silent, brilliant flower of light, the real world ended. It began with a hum, a low subsonic vibration that resonated up through the deck plates, through the soles of their boots and into the marrow of their bones. The bridge lights flickered violently, then dimmed to a sickly emergency red. The holographic displays dissolved into waterfalls of screaming static. A Drevian cadet looked up from his console, his rigid posture broken by a twitch of confusion. This wasn't in the simulation parameters. Then came the wave. It was both feeling and sound, the sound of a vacuum, a roaring emptiness that sucked all other thought from the mind, leaving only the cold, hard, absolute certainty. You are alone. It was a crushing pressure at the base of the skull, the shriek of every nerve ending firing at once in a symphony of dread. The universe hollowed out, and you were the last thing left. Ilya felt his breath catch in his chest. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. The feeling was alien, invasive, a violation of his very mind. He looked at Shiriel. Her serene composure had shattered. Her bark-like skin had gone pale, the color of ash. She gasped, a ragged, tearing sound, and stumbled back from her console. Her eyes were wide, staring into the middle distance. But Ilya knew she saw a cosmic horror only her mind, so attuned to the universe, could perceive. She was no longer on the bridge. She was somewhere else entirely. The psychic assault from the unseen enemy, the choral silence, had begun. It hijacked the station's network, broadcasting weaponized despair directly into their souls. The disciplined, high-tech bridge of the Vigilance dissolved into a canvas of primal fear. The collapse was immediate and absolute. The Alari cadets broke first. Their philosophy of detached observation offered no defense against a direct, overwhelming injection of cosmic dread. Shiriel slumped into her chair, her limbs trembling.
The great unraveling,
she whispered, her voice a fragile, broken thing.
The threads are cut. All patterns decay into the silent nothingness.
They were still, quiet, simply broken. Utterly and catatonically crushed by the cosmic futility of it all. They saw the heat death of the universe in their minds, and they accepted it. The Drevians, who prized order above all else, reacted next. As one, the Drevian cadets on the bridge began their unity chants, a low, rhythmic thrumming meant to reinforce their collective consciousness. But the psychic static, the weaponized loneliness, was a worm in their code. It twisted the ritual. A Drevian cadet would hear the chant from his brother and perceive a subtle, fatal flaw in the rhythm, a misspoken sacred verse, a heresy. The whispers of the silence told them their collective's foundations were a lie, their commander a fraud, the perfect machine flawed. Their rigid discipline failed to compute this paradox. Some froze, their compound eyes staring blankly at their consoles, trapped in a logic loop. Others got stuck in a physical loop, repeating a single meaningless gesture, tapping a console, adjusting a strap, turning their head over and over, their perfect machine grinding to a screeching, pathetic halt. The Corvidan response was the most violent. The psychic attack found the spark of suspicion inherent in their dominance-based culture and poured gasoline on it. Vethrin's head snapped around, his eyes wide with a shockingly raw terror. He saw his closest ally, a Corvidan named Jorn, reach for a communications panel. It was a simple, reflexive action, but in Vethrin's terror-soaked mind, amplified by the silence, it was an act of ultimate betrayal. Jorn was cutting him off, calling for security, seizing command. "Traitor!" Vethrin shrieked, his voice cracking with agonized fear. He launched himself at Jorn, his powerful legs propelling him across the deck. The bridge erupted into pockets of brutal, savage infighting as the Corvidans turned on one another, their competitive instincts weaponized into a self-destructive paranoid frenzy. They turned on one another, each believing with every fiber of their being that their closest friends were about to stab them in the back. Ilya felt it too. The cold, oily dread seeped into the cracks of his mind, whispering truths he'd always feared. "You're an outsider. You don't belong here. They all hate you. You are alone. No one is coming to save you. You will die forgotten in this cold metal can, 1,000 light years from a sun that doesn't even know your name." His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. The urge to curl into a ball and give in to the overwhelming despair was immense. It felt like drowning in ice water. But just as the cold blackness threatened to swallow him whole, something deeper flared to life. An instinct forged in caves and on savannas, huddled around a fire while predators screamed in the dark. It was the defiant, stubborn refusal to die alone. Across the chaotic bridge, through the flickering red light and the screaming static, he saw Zara Rostova. She had just shoved a catatonic Drevian out of her way. Her face was pale and streaked with sweat, but her eyes blazed with a furious, cornered animal energy. She scanned the room, her search a desperate, intense one, far from panic. Their gazes locked for a split second across 20 meters of pandemonium. No words were exchanged. Time was a luxury. It was a reflex born of 1,000,000 years of evolution, an unspoken primal scream of recognition. There you are. You are mine. I am yours. "Zara!" Ilya yelled, his voice a raw, guttural sound that cut through the noise. "Ilya!" she yelled back, a desperate anchor in the storm. Where the loneliness paralyzed others, it activated them. The silence told them they were alone, and their instincts screamed back. "Then find the others." They instinctively moved toward each other, shoving aside frozen Drevians and ignoring the brawling Corvidans, forging a pack of two in the center of the hurricane. As he wove through the chaos, Ilya saw Shiriel on the floor. She was curled into a tight fetal position beside her console, her hands pressed against the sides of her head, lost in her private psychic horror. He could have run past her. The logical, tactical part of his brain told him she was a liability. He ignored it. On instinct, he stooped and grabbed her arm. The physical contact jolted them both. Shiriel flinched violently, her mind screaming that this was an attack, an invasion, another horror clawing at her from the unraveling universe. But then she felt it. The solid, unwavering warmth of his grip, the pressure of his fingers. It felt predatory. A gravitational pull, a possessive, anchoring force. It consumed the vast, cold emptiness the psychic attack had ripped open inside her soul, an anchoring force rather than a destructive one. This was an anchor in the storm, a tether to reality in the abyss. He hauled her to her feet. She stumbled, her legs weak. He half dragged, half carried her behind a bank of shattered consoles as Veteran and another Corvidan smashed into a nearby bulkhead, screeching with paranoid fury.
Stay with me,
Ilya grunted, his voice tight with exertion and strain. He felt the psychic dread pushing at him, trying to find a crack. He pushed her down, forcing her to look at him.
Shrieked, look at me. Breathe with me. In, out.
He exaggerated his own breathing, a slow, steady rhythm. In, out. Shriek's eyes, wide with cosmic terror, focused on his face. She still trembled, but the frantic, shallow gasps began to slow, to hitch, to tentatively match his rhythm. The simple, shared biological act of breathing together began to build a tiny wall against the howling storm in her mind. In the heavily shielded command center, 3 decks above the chaos, Commander Orvac fought for control of his station and his own mind. The psychic interference was weaker here, dampened by layers of reinforced hull. But he felt its corrosive influence at the edge of his thoughts, a cold whisper of doubt, a faint suggestion that his subordinates were failing him, that procedure was meaningless. He ruthlessly suppressed it with the iron discipline of his species. On his security monitors, he watched the complete and utter breakdown of order on the auxiliary bridge, the commander's worst nightmare. His cadets, the future of the coalition fleet, turned on each other or collapsed into catatonia. He pulled up the station's live biotelemetry feeds, his analytical mind searching for a pattern, a weakness, anything. The data was a sea of red. Brains flooded with cortisol, adrenaline, and terror markers. Neurochemistry in catastrophic, system-wide failure across the board. But then, he isolated the 2 human signatures, Mikhailov and Rostova. He stared at the readouts, his unblinking eyes widening fractionally. The data was astounding. Their cortisol and adrenaline levels were off the charts, yes. They were terrified. But a massive spike in oxytocin, vasopressin, and endorphins actively, aggressively counteracted these readings. Their brains generated a powerful, complex neurochemical antidote in real time, one that resisted the psychic assault, an antidote triggered by proximity and mutual distress. He watched on the monitor as Ilya pulled Shrieked to her feet. He zoomed in on their biosignatures. The moment Ilya made physical contact, Shriek's terror markers, which had flatlined in catastrophic overload, began to fluctuate, to stabilize slightly. She was piggybacking on his biological defense. He switched feeds and saw Zara Rostova reach the center of the room. She and Ilya were now meters apart. Their respective oxytocin levels surged again.
They are reinforcing each other,
Orvac breathed, the words a synthesized hiss. For the first time in his decorated career, his voice was laced with a strange new emotion. Awe. The pressure increases, and they respond by strengthening their bond. They grow stronger. Veteran was on the ground. The fight had been short and brutal. Jorn, his wingman, his closest friend at the academy, had slammed him into a console and disarmed him. Now Jorn stood over him, holding a heavy metal maintenance strut he'd ripped from a wall panel. His eyes were wide and milky with paranoia, his feathers slick with sweat.
You were always jealous,
Jorn hissed, his voice a choked sob.
You wanted my posting. You planned to report me for that simulation failure last week. Jorn, no!
Veteran gasped, paralyzed by a mixture of betrayal and raw terror. This was his friend, and his friend was going to murder him. The silence whispered its victory in his ear.
See, you were right to trust no one. Everyone is an enemy.
Just as Jorn raised the strut for a fatal blow, a blur of motion slammed into his side. It was Ilya, the human. The fight was a desperate, ugly brawl that had none of the grace of a duel. Ilya was smaller, lighter, and by any Corvidan metric, profoundly weaker. But Ilya's fight was to protect a member of his group, even one he actively disliked. The irrational loyalty of the act, so different from a struggle for dominance or glory, was a logical paradox Jorn's paranoia-addled brain couldn't process. The Corvidan mind, now stripped down to its most cynical and suspicious core, failed to parse it. Ilya ducked under a wild swing, got inside Jorn's reach, and used a low-gravity leverage technique from basic training. He pivoted, using Jorn's own momentum against him, and slammed the larger Corvidan hard into a bulkhead. Jorn's head connected with a sickening crunch, and he slid to the floor, stunned and groaning. Ilya stood over him, panting, his knuckles bloody. He turned to Vethran, who still lay on the floor, staring. He looked at the small, insignificant human who had just saved his life from his own kind. Vethran felt no gratitude, only a profound, soul-shaking humiliation. He, a prime Corvidan warrior, a top cadet, had been defeated by his own and saved by the creature he considered the weakest of the entire station. The universe, as he understood it, had just turned inside out and set on fire. It no longer made any sense. The psychic storm intensified. The station's automated defense systems, their core programming corrupted by the hostile signal, began to flicker and die. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut at random, and the artificial gravity fluctuated nauseatingly. In the middle of the auxiliary bridge, a strange island had formed. Ilya and Zara now stood back to back, a solid core of mutual defense. Ilya had hauled the trembling Shrieked with him, while Vethran, shell-shocked and silent, had scrambled to his feet and now stood near them, his eyes darting around, but never straying far from the human who had saved him. They had become a point of stability in a sea of madness, and the other survivors began to notice. An Alari cadet, seeing Shrieked breathing in a slow, steady rhythm with the humans, began to crawl toward them, his movements sluggish but deliberate. A pair of Drevian cadets, their unity ritual shattered and their minds adrift, saw the steadfast human pair and slowly, mechanically, moved to stand behind them, as if drawn by an invisible force. On his monitor in the command center, Commander Orvac watched this bizarre coalescence with growing alarm. A small, stable system formed in the midst of total chaos, centered on the two human cadets. An anomaly, an unpredicted variable, and it was spreading. Cadets of different species, their own social structures annihilated by the psychic attack, were instinctively gravitating toward the one source of neurochemical stability on the bridge. "It's spreading," Orvac muttered to himself, his voice tight with a suspicion that bordered on fear. "Their cohesion is contagious." To his orderly Drevian mind, it looked like a beautiful, terrifying disease. A small, desperate mixed-species squad was born. Its foundation was a primal, biological need for the stability the humans projected, a stark contrast to the usual discipline of orders and regulations. Commander Orvac, watching this one stable, contagious unit, made a decision. It violated a dozen sections of the Coalition command procedure, but the established procedure had already failed. He had a single, desperate chance centered on the two cadets his own people had flagged as a threat to cohesion. The irony was a sharp, metallic taste in his thoughts. He worked his console with grim purpose, isolating a secure, hardline communications channel, bypassing the corrupted main network. He routed it directly to the standard-issue comms implants of the human cadets. "Mikolov, Rostova, this is Commander Orvac. Do you read me?" Ilya flinched as the voice cut through the psychic static in his head. "Commander, we read you." "Listen carefully." Orvac's voice was flat, but carried an undercurrent of extreme urgency. "The enemy is hijacking the station's primary network integrity signal. They use our own systems to broadcast the psychic attack. Their vessel is latched to the outer hull near the primary engineering sector. You must get to the tertiary comms relay on Deck 12, Section Gamma. An older system, it's physically isolated from the main network. You must access the generator panel and initiate a hard reboot of the signal generator. It will purge their parasitic frequency from the system and sever their connection. This is our only chance." "The bridge is sealed off, Commander." Zara's voice cut in, sharp and pragmatic. "We can't get out that way." "The maintenance shafts," Orvac replied instantly.
Access panel behind console 9. They will take you to deck 12. Go now. The fate of this station depends on you.
The line went dead. Ilya looked at Zara. Her jaw was set. He then looked at the strange, terrified group that had gathered around them. A broken Aleri, a humiliated Corvidan, and 2 dazed Drevians. This was his squad now.
Well,
Ilya said, his voice laced with gallows humor.
At least we have an objective.
The journey to engineering was a gauntlet through a hell of the mind. The maintenance shafts were tight, dark, and filled with the groaning protests of a dying station. The psychic attack was a constant pressure, and the narrow corridors seemed to flicker with hallucinatory threats, skittering shadows in the corners of their vision, whispers that sounded like their own names spoken with contempt. Ilya took point while Zara took the rear guard to maintain cohesion. Early on, one of the Drevians froze, convinced the bulkhead in front of him was a living monster. It took them precious minutes to coax him into moving again. After that, Ilya knew they needed something more. He tore a length of thick synth fabric strapping from a damaged conduit housing.
"Everybody, link up,"
he ordered. Vethrin stared at the strap as if it were a chain.
What is this?
"This is us staying together,"
Ilya said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He tied one end around his own waist. He gave the middle section to a shivering Shiriel, who gripped it like a lifeline. He then handed the end to a deeply reluctant Vethrin.
"Tie it, now."
Vethrin hesitated, his pride warring with the primal fear that gnawed at him. He looked at the confident set of Ilya's jaw, then at the strap connecting him to the serene-looking Aleri. Zara stood behind him, waiting, her expression unreadable. He was being physically tethered between them. Herded, with a growl of frustration, he secured the strap around his waist. The first few steps were a disaster. Vethrin, accustomed to leading, surged forward with his long stride, yanking the strap taut. Shiriel cried out as she was pulled off balance, stumbling hard into Vethrin's back. The chain reaction nearly sent him and Zara to the floor.
"Hold!"
Ilya barked, his voice echoing in the cramped shaft. He turned, his face grim in the gloom.
"This is a lifeline, Vethrin. It's meant to connect us, not constrain you. We move together, or we move nowhere. You feel the tug from me, you step. You feel the pull from behind, you slow down. We are one body now. Understand?"
Vethrin said nothing, but the angry tension in his shoulders seemed to deflate, replaced by a sullen, grudging acceptance.
"Good,"
Ilya said.
"From the front, simple plan. Left foot, right foot. Repeat until we get there. Sound off."
He moved slowly this time.
"Left foot. Right foot."
Zara's voice came from the rear, solid and sure. Shiriel, her voice a whisper, joined in.
"Left foot."
There was a pause, then a low, guttural sound from behind Shiriel.
Right foot.
Vethrin bit out, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The humiliation was a constant grinding pressure, second only to the psychic dread that waited to pounce the moment his concentration wavered. Yet he felt the cold, practical fact that the crushing paranoia receded to a manageable hum when he focused on the rhythmic tug of the strap and the steady, monotonous tramp of their feet. He was trapped, but he was also terrifyingly safe. They rounded a corner in a wider service corridor and came face to face with a squad of 3 Drevian cadets. The psychic attack had twisted their disciplined minds into a different kind of madness. To them, order was inverted. Ilya's small, chaotic, mixed-species group was the ultimate expression of entropy, a monstrous, chaotic apparition that must be purged to restore balance. The Drevians attacked without a word, wielding salvaged conduit pipes like clubs, their movements rigid and uncoordinated, but backed by their species' considerable strength. Vethrin's first, deepest instinct screamed at him. Survive. The thought was clear and sharp in his mind, a cold, perfect shard of selfish logic. Break the strap. Shove the human forward as a distraction. Run. He was faster than any of them. He could make it. He even tensed his muscles, his hand moving to the knot at his waist. The instant he entertained the thought, The instant he considered severing his connection to the pack, the psychic dread he held at bay crashed back into him, stealing the air from his lungs. A vision, vivid and horrifying, flashed behind his eyes. He was alone in the dark corridor, hunted by Jorn and the other Corvidans, their eyes burning with paranoid hatred, the faces of the Drevians in front of him melting into those of his own kind. He would be torn apart by his own kind. In that single moment of selfish terror, he understood. His survival was tied to the steady rhythm of the human's chant, to the physical tug of the strap, to this bizarre, infuriating pack. His anchor was them. With a roar that was part fury, part desperation, and part something entirely new, he lunged forward. He met the Drevian attack head-on, placing his larger, stronger body between the threat and Ilya, his charge, a direct answer to the impulse to flee.
Alpha Squad, engage!
He bellowed, the old command a reflex. The fight was a clumsy, brutal ballet. Zara moved up from the rear, a whirlwind of motion, using her smaller size to get under the Drevian's guard. Ilya directed, calling targets. Shrieked, to everyone's surprise, used her long, flexible limbs to trip one attacker, sending him sprawling. Vethran acted as the shield, absorbing and deflecting blows with a savage focus, his rage fueled now by a bizarrely protective instinct that displaced the paranoia. They worked together, a strange but terrifyingly effective unit, subduing the Drevians with non-lethal force before pressing on, their rhythmic chant resuming, now faster, more urgent. They finally reached the tertiary comms relay in engineering, a small, shielded room cramped with humming machinery. The psychic pressure here was immense, a physical weight that made their jaws clench and their vision swim with dark spots. This was the heart of the storm, the place where the enemy's signal was strongest. The signal generator's reboot sequence was a complex fail-safe procedure designed by a committee of paranoid engineers. It required 3 separate operators to input cryptographic keys at 3 separate consoles, synchronized to the millisecond. A task designed to require absolute trust and perfect communication, the very things the psychic weapon was built to destroy. Ilya took one console. Zara took the other.
Shrieked, Vethran,
Ilya gasped, the pressure in his skull making it hard to think.
One of you has to take the 3rd console. You have to sync with us.
Vethran moved toward the 3rd console, but his hands shook. He kept glancing at the door, his paranoia flaring, convinced an ambush was imminent. Shrieked reached her console, but her hands trembled over the keys, visions of the silent, empty nothingness overwhelming her senses.
I can't, she whispered. The roaring emptiness. It's too loud.
They were going to fail. The pressure was too great. Their fragile cohesion was about to shatter. In a moment of desperate, half-mad inspiration, Ilya did something completely insane. He sang. The song was a rough, off-key bellowing rendition of an ancient Earth sea shanty, a tune of sweat and salt, not polish and patriotism. A song for hauling ropes on a wooden ship under a sky he'd only ever seen in pictures. A memory flashed in his mind, the smell of salt and engine grease, his grandfather's rough, calloused hand on his shoulder during a fierce squall on a small fishing boat, the old man's voice booming over the wind, singing this exact song.
Heave, my lads, and heave together,
Ilya sang, his voice cracking.
What are you doing?
Vethran snarled, turning from the door.
Grandad swore this got them through the worst storms,
Ilya gasped out between lines, never breaking rhythm.
It's a work song, for hauling, for pulling together. Pull on the beat.
Zara, across the room, understood instantly. She'd grown up in the same coastal region. She knew the songs. Her clear, steady voice joined his, harmonizing on the line.
Heave and watch for windy weather.
The simple, powerful driving rhythm was infectious. A primal act of coordinated effort made a sound, a defiant heartbeat against the cold, crushing pressure of the silence. The song was a weapon that cut through the psychic noise, a defiant pulse of messy, emotional life that carved a space within the cold, sterile signal of despair. Between verses, a power conduit on the ceiling arced with a flash of blue light, showering them in harmless sparks. The deck plating groaned under their feet, but the rhythm of their song, the stamp of their boots on the metal, never wavered. For Shrieked, the experience was a spiritual cataclysm. She was teetering on the edge of the great, silent emptiness the psychic attack had shown her, a blankness of perfect, meaningless detachment, the ultimate end of her people's philosophy. The song was its absolute antithesis, a warm, rhythmic, stubbornly persistent beat. Illogical, emotional, covered in salt and sweat, an anchor of flawed, beautiful reality. She felt the cold nothingness pulling at her one side, and the warm, thumping pulse of the human pack on the other. With a shuddering breath that felt like a tectonic shift in her soul, she made a choice. She closed her eyes, shut out the visions of the nothingness, and focused only on the beat of the song. Her trembling fingers steadied on the console. Vethrin let out a roar. It had none of his earlier rage or paranoia. It was a Corvidan war cry, a deep, guttural sound from the bottom of his lungs. But he twisted it, forced it into the rhythm of the human song, a sound like a garbage disposal eating a bagpipe. He slammed his massive fist on the console casing in perfect time with the chorus, a percussive blast of disciplined violence. They were a single crew, hauling on a rope together against a colossal storm, their separate species dissolving into one identity.
Heave!
Ilya and Zara bellowed. On the final crashing beat of the verse, 3 sets of hands, human, Aleri, and Corvidan, hit their consoles. 3 cryptographic keys entered in perfect, glorious unison. The signal generator whined, its pitch rising to an ear-splitting shriek. Then, with a deafening crack of displaced energy, it emitted a massive surge of uncorrupted data, the station's original benign network integrity signal. On the command bridge, Commander Orvac watched the waveform analysis on his master screen. The hostile psychic frequency, a jagged, malevolent line of red, flickered, wavered, and was then brutally overridden by a clean, powerful wave of green. The crushing mental pressure across the entire vigilance shattered like glass, an abrupt end rather than a slow fade. In its place was a profound, ringing silence. The only sound on the auxiliary bridge was the ragged, exhausted breathing of the cadets and the faint, tinny echo of an old human song coming from the ship-wide comm, which had accidentally been left open in engineering. On Orvac's main tactical display, the small, stealthy enemy ship latched to the hull abruptly detached. Its severed psychic link, its only weapon, was gone. It flared its engines and burned hard for deep space, abandoning its attack, retreating from the incomprehensible noise that had just overpowered its silence. The station was a wreck. The aftermath was a quiet, grim affair of damage control and casualty reports. The infighting had been brutal. The system failures caused by erratic crew had taken a heavy toll, but the attack was over. Med teams moved through the corridors, finding dazed, traumatized, and utterly alone cadets curled up in corners or staring blankly at walls. They discovered a strange pattern. The only fire teams or impromptu groups that maintained any semblance of cohesion were the ones who had, by chance or desperation, rallied to one of the handful of human cadets scattered across the station. In the tertiary comms relay room in engineering, the song was long over. Ilya, Zara, Vethrin, and Shrieked were slumped against their consoles, utterly spent. They were bruised, battered, and emotionally scoured. But they were alive, breathing the same air in a silent, unbreakable circle of camaraderie. The straps that bound them together lay discarded on the floor, no longer necessary. Days later, the Academy began the slow, arduous process of recovery and rebuilding. In his gray office, Commander Orvac filed his official after-action report, a document Coalition High Command would study for decades. He pulled up the original Drevian Xenological Survey of Sol System, Sector 3, the first official contact report on humanity. His compound eyes scanned the dry analytical text until he found the appendix on Terran military potential. There it was, the source of the scanner's warning. He read the summary of their contagious cohesion and the final clinical assessment. Recommendation: in mixed species operations, maintain sterile distance in case of emergent pack bonding behavior. Standard procedure is to evacuate immediate vicinity and establish quarantine. A stark, cowardly line of text born from fear and misunderstanding. With a single sharp tap of a claw finger, he deleted it. The cursor blinked on the now empty field, a space waiting for a new truth. He began to type. The Class Omega biosignature classification for the species Homo sapiens is correct in its assessment, but critically flawed in its recommendation. The scanner warned us to evacuate the vicinity of the human subject. It should have told us to rally to them. The data confirms that humans are, by our strictest xenobiological definitions, predators. But their prey is fleshless. They hunt isolation. They are predators of loneliness. He paused, letting the weight of the word settle. The initial Drevian assessment of their unique bonding chemistry as a social contagion was also accurate, but fundamentally misunderstood. The Terran social contagion is an inoculation that strengthens the whole, a powerful counteragent to sickness. It is a biological defense mechanism against the weaponized despair, paranoia, and loneliness employed by enemies like the Coral Silence. Their biology, once deemed a chaotic weakness and a threat to discipline, is hereby reclassified. It is the Coalition's most powerful, least understood, and most vital strategic asset. The mess hall was quiet and somber in the week that followed. The cadets processed the trauma, moving with a subdued gravity. Ilya sat with Zara, the two eating in a comfortable, easy silence that needed no words. Vethrin walked over to their table. He looked different. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a heavy, thoughtful silence. His feathers, which once slid from black to blue, were now a uniform, muted coral. His posture less confrontational. He stopped before Ilya's side of the table. He said nothing. He simply stood there for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, placed a closed fist over the center of his chest. The most profound Corvidan gesture. It symbolized a life debt, acknowledged superior strength, and offered absolute, unwavering respect. Then, without a word, he pulled out a chair and sat with them. Across the room, Shiriel sat with the other surviving Illyri. She met Ilya's eyes. Her gaze held a deep, sincere, and slightly terrified reverence that had replaced her old pity and detached curiosity. She raised her cup of protein gel in a silent toast. "Where we wither in the silence," she told him earlier that day, her voice full of a newfound wonder. "You entwine and sing against the dark. That is a dangerous and beautiful thing, and it saved us all." The jokes about Ilya Mikhailov's small size had stopped. No one mentioned his species' quaintly evolved biology anymore. A profound and slightly odd respect for the predators who hunted loneliness itself had replaced the fear and contempt.